What's up, y'all? We're back. Episode 13 of Revent Builds Behind the Build. This week, we poured our foundation at our West Austin remodel and addition. This foundation is pretty substantial. Before we get into the details of the pour itself, I want to take this time to just go over a little bit of the procedures on how you pour a foundation. You want to find exactly where you're building this foundation. You have the survey company come out and they're going to pin the corners of your foundation. After the corners are pinned, if you need to excavate, now's the time to do it. In this case, we had to excavate because part of this foundation, it's 2 stories where there's a basement where the ground is high, and where that soil slopes down, it goes to what we call a walkout basement. So we had to excavate quite a bit of area. So then you do your excavation. Now it's going to be time to set your forms. These are just simply the wooden boards that make up the border of your foundation. They call it a form because when you pour against it, it forms the edges of your foundation. So then when you get your forms up, you have your survey company come back out and then they do a form survey. And this is extremely important. I don't care what environment you're in. If you're in the middle of the country and there's no permits, the stakes aren't as high, but still, you want to just make sure that you're building exactly to your plan. But in an inner city setting, this is paramount. If for some reason you poured your foundation outside of an area that you were allotted into what's called the setback where we can't build, or let's say in an erosion hazard zone or in a septic field, then the city can actually make you tear all of that out and start back over. That would be a disaster. What's great is in the city of Austin, they make us get a form survey and they make us upload that, and the inspector is going to look and make sure that we're adhering to where those forms are. So once you knock the form survey out, you know you're good to go. You can't really screw it up at that point. The next portion is digging out your grade beams. So you have the area of your forms on the inside of your foundation. There are these areas that we dig deeper in this grid pattern where the beams, we call them beams, they're usually about 3 feet deep, 2 feet wide, and they can be deeper or more shallow depending on your soil. If you have a lot of clay, you're gonna have way deeper beams because we don't want that foundation to move. If you're sitting right on top of bedrock, the beams will not have to be as deep because you have a really sturdy base for the foundation to sit on. So once we dig all that out, it's then the plumber's turn to come in. We locate all of our drain locations on the plan. We get the architect to dimension that out, and then you find like a corner or you find an existing part of the house that you can easily map it out. So we know where our toilet is, we know where our shower is, we know where sink stub outs, we know where hose bibs are, all of those things. The plumbers run all of their drain lines. They basically screw up a lot of the work that the foundation guys did, but this is part of the process. The next stage after we get plumbing in is we're gonna build back up those areas that were messed up by the plumber. We're gonna use either dirt, or a lot of the time they'll use sandbags in this application, because if you, let's say a drain line goes through the corner of one of these grids, it's gonna be a lot more brittle. You can't just use dirt. So we'll actually fill sandbags full of dirt and we'll pack them up to where they need to be. Once all the plumbing and the grade beams are good, we're gonna cover everything with what's called a poly. And that is just basically like a garbage bag material. It's a plastic sheet that we put over the dirt because we don't want the moisture of that dirt to come up through the concrete from below, and that can cause a ton of different issues. It can cause the foundation to move. It can cause moisture to come up through the flooring. It can cause tile and wood flooring to buckle, all these different issues that you don't want. So once we get our poly down, we can get our rebar in, and that's called a rebar mat. So at the top, it's just a thin layer of rebar, but it goes down into the grade beams. So the guys have to form what's called stirrups, which is basically just a loop around different rebar to make up those sections of the grade beam. So the rebar is what holds the foundation together. It's basically like a webbing that just keeps all the concrete together, and it's very important. The thing is, All of this sounds super complicated, but it's all in the plan. The engineer tells you what number rebar you need, how far they're supposed to be spaced out. They want bricks on the bottom that hold that rebar off the ground. They want depths on your grade beams. All the information's there. And then guess what? After you get the rebar in, you have the engineer come out for a pre-pour inspection, and they're gonna check all of this stuff. So they're a safeguard to making sure that you're doing it right. So when you go to do a new project or a foundation or even a house, there's a lot of these things that will help you. You don't need to know everything, right? I mean, you need to know the general gist of things, of course, but there's a lot more safeguards that will help you out, where you can call in inspections and you have engineers to rely on and you have architects to rely on. These people will help make sure that you're doing all the right things. Then there's a number of inspections. We have the engineer for the rebar. Then we're gonna have the city come out and they'll do their own inspections for pre-pour. And a lot of that is checking our plumbing. So after everything is in, we want to make sure that our plumbing is all tested. So what we do with that is we fill it all up with water. We have basically a test tee, which comes out of the ground, and the inspector just comes in there and looks and makes sure that it's full of water. If it's full of water, you know that it's holding pressure and it's going to be good. Another thing the inspectors always want to see is a fall. So the inspectors are going to check the slope on all of those plumbing lines and make sure that it's good. Another very important thing that you do not want to forget is electric grounding. Every time you do a new foundation, they're going to want you to get copper wire and ground it to all of your rebar. And there's a certain feet. We need to be about 30 feet of ground, and that will connect right into your electric panel. That's called a UFER. So we get our electrician to install that UFER, we get it inspected by the city, and we need to make sure that's in before you pour, because if you pour without a UFER, the inspector is gonna make you chip out down to the rebar for that 30 feet and then put that line in, and it's a huge pain in the ass after the fact. Now you've passed all your inspections, your pre-pour is done, and simply all that's left is to pour. And pouring in itself is a whole event. You're gonna need a pump truck. You're gonna obviously need your concrete. You're gonna need many, many different guys that are gonna pour the concrete. They're gonna use our vibrators to make sure that there's no air pockets in the concrete. They have a screed, which is basically just a long broom, and it's on a swivel, and that can make it level and tilt in different ways. So they're gonna screed all of that concrete, make sure that we have a nice level surface. Then we have our disc fans that basically just aerate the concrete, help flatten everything out. Water is your friend. You want a nice wet foundation, so we have hoses out there. If it's super hot, like in our Texas summers, we usually leave sprinklers on there for the next 3 days. And then basically, once your concrete is all hardened and cured, you can bust off all of those wood forms and you'll be good to go. So all that being said, we just poured. It was a successful pour, but hot pour days suck. You want to start as early as possible because concrete really doesn't like the heat. It's just a lot harder to work with. It gets a lot more viscous and sloppy, and honestly, the work is just tremendously harder when it's that hot out, right? But the guys nailed it. There was a couple things that we really needed to make sure went well. So as I mentioned earlier, we had portions of the existing slab that we needed to hold up. And what we had to do was use rebar to make piers to hold that foundation up before we even poured this slab. So pouring those, making sure that was all stable, was another part of the process that really isn't normal. If you're doing a new house, you're never gonna have to worry about that, right? But we're having to worry about keeping the existing house up so that it doesn't fall down while we're excavating and pouring the slab for this new addition. So it's just complexities on top of complexities. All in all, it was a successful pour, about 60 tons of concrete, or about 6 trucks. That's a large amount of concrete for this size of addition. Next on our plate is we have to do quite a bit of retaining walls that are gonna make up the walls of our walkout basement. Where everything is underground, we need to retain the earth. That's why it's called a retaining wall. We're gonna pour all of that in the next stage, and then we can move on to framing. As always, thank y'all so much for watching. Love every one of y'all. Comment, share, like, do the things. Help us grow. I really appreciate it. See y'all in the next one.